Discuss all of this on our program today. I'm joined by Parliamentary Secretary Alan Tudge and Shadow Parliamentary Secretary Matt Thistlethwaite. The first to you, Matt Thistlethwaite. Are too many people on disability support payments at the moment?
Well, look, David, when we were in government, we undertook a review of the disability support pension and ensured that it was meeting its objectives. Labor always believes in the empowerment of work for people with disabilities, and we put in place a number of programs to ensure that those people in the Australian economy that could work with disability had the opportunities to. So that's done through intensive support programs, through employment service providers. It's done by ensuring that the necessary payments are there to support people to not only find work, but to have modifications to jobs and businesses to ensure that that work is sustainable into the future.
Do you agree, though, with Tony Abbott that more people, particularly young people, under 35 is what this audit will focus on, can be, in his words, encouraged back into the workforce?
Well, we'll have to wait and see the details of what's being proposed. But as I said, when Labor was in government, we took a number of reforms that saw many more people living with disabilities in our community get into employment. What I'm really concerned about with this budget, however, David, is the recommendations that we've seen from the Commission of Audit about the National Disability Insurance Scheme. You see, the approach to disability that Labor took was a whole of government approach, ensuring that there was the necessary support there for people who wanted to work through intensive employment programs, but also that there was the necessary home support through NDIS packages that was being delivered to people with disabilities. And the Commission of Audit recommendations are to slow down the rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. If that's the approach that the Abbott government is going to take, then that's not the way that we should be supporting people with disabilities, particularly encouraging them into work.
OK, we're going to bring in Alan Tudge in just a moment, but I just want to move on before we do to corporate welfare, because reports as well in today's papers that $10 billion worth of welfare for business will also face the chop under Joe Hockey's budget. Is that something that Labor will support, scaling back some of the money that the government hands out to businesses around Australia? Matt Thistlethwaite.
We need to see the details. If you're talking about reforming some of the support and incentives that are there for business, they're big changes, and we need to see the details. But again, no mention of this prior to the election. The government campaigned, and Tony Abbott made it a focal point of his campaign to beat up the notion of a budget emergency in Australia, but at the same time said that there would be no changes to the pension, no changes to education, to the ABC, and no tax increases. Yet that's exactly what we're facing the prospect of on Tuesday night. So we'll hold this government to account to the obligations that they put forward to the Australian public prior to the election, and that means they should hold their commitments for no tax increases.
OK, let's bring in Alan Tudge now, who joins us from our Melbourne studio. We've just been talking about welfare for business and the pension and also, of course, disability support, an audit in today's papers that may be conducted. Alan Tudge, just first on disability support, do you think too many people are on disability welfare payments?
Good morning, David. Great to be on your program. And the issue with the disability support pension is that it is growing very rapidly. There's more than 800,000 people on it presently, and that's growing by the tens of thousands each year. The essential problem with the DSP is that it doesn't recognise people's overall capacity, if you like, or their capabilities. And what we would like to do is to ensure that those who are able to work are encouraged to do so. Rather, at the moment, the system tends to put a person on the disability support pension and then, if you like, set and forget and leave them for a very long time, even though there might be a willingness, a desire and a capacity to at least make some contribution.
Why is there just a focus, according to these reports today, on people under 35? What about the rest of the Australians who are on these payments?
Listen, I don't want to speculate in terms of what's going to be announced in the budget, David, but clearly with younger people, we want to ensure that every young person, as much as possible, is earning or learning to their maximum extent, because those who are on welfare of any description for any length of time, to get back onto employment subsequent to that is very, very difficult. So our aim is to try to ensure that young people are never on welfare, that they are indeed earning or learning from day one, so that they can have a rich and vibrant life and can contribute to the community just like anybody else.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the Fairfax Reach-Tell polls that are out today in the papers. The two-party preferred aren't good news for the government, but that's to be expected. Also to be expected, I suppose, is that the majority of Australians don't want to work until they're 70. Surprise, surprise, surprise. 68% of people don't support lifting the pension age to 70. Only 21% do support it. But I thought this one was more interesting. The debt tax. 54% of those polled by Reach-Tell now support it. Only 32% are opposed now. Matt Thistlethwaite, has the government succeeded in selling its message here?
Well, the government succeeded in breaking a promise, David. Again, before the election, Tony Abbott was very clear. So was Joe Hockey. No increases to taxes. And that's exactly what this deficit levy is. It's an increase in taxation. It's not supported by Labor. It has the potential to harm domestic demand in our economy. If you look at the elements of domestic demand, which has been quite volatile in our economy at the moment, some of the stronger performing areas are areas such as sales of new cars, construction, particularly home construction. A deficit levy like this could put a dampener on the sale of a new car, on the renovation of a family home, and that will affect demand and affect jobs, and that's why it's not supported by Labor.
Alan Tudge, has the government notched up a win already?
I don't want to speculate on the polls, or do I want to speculate on the precise details of what will be in the budget. But as you know, we do have a plan to increase the pension age out to 70. But bear in mind that it's already locked in to increase to the age of 67 by 2023. And our proposal would be to increase it to the age of 70 by 2035. Now, by that time, by 2035, almost any person who is eligible for the pension would have been working for a long time and would have been receiving superannuation for almost their entire life. So by that stage, most people indeed have a nest egg of superannuation which they will be able to rely upon. And that it was indeed the overall agenda of superannuation going many decades back now.
And just very briefly, Alan Tudge, on the debt tax, specifically on this poll today.
Oh, listen, again, I don't want to comment on the specifics of the poll or what might or might not be in the budget, but most of the media speculation today is referring to the absolute upper income band, which constitutes 2 or 3% of the population. So that's what we're talking about here in terms of what the media is at least speculating. So let's just put that into some perspective.
Okay, well, I want to look now at the proposed changes to the way Senate elections happen in this country. The changes from, well, a tripartisan joint committee that would see, if implemented as expected, an end to, well, those giant ballot papers for a start, and also the run of success from the so-called micro-parties, optional preferential voting above and below the line would be part of these changes, and also a tripling of the number of members to achieve party status. I want to bring in the so-called preference whisperer, Glenn Drury, to our conversation now. Glenn Drury, thanks for joining us on Saturday Agenda. These reforms are really aimed at putting you out of a job, aren't they?
Look, these reforms are really aimed at disenfranchising 5 million Australians that voted for parties other than the majors.
But you're one of the only people who understands the way that votes actually go in Senate elections. That's why people pay you to look at these sorts of things. For example, you know, Ricky Muir from the Motoring Enthusiasts Party, who was elected with 0.0354% of the vote. It's, for many people, just blind faith voting in these Senate elections, isn't it?
0.051% actually for Ricky Muir. Look, we have a political system at the moment in this country that does allow ordinary people to enter the political process. You don't necessarily have to be a party hack or a factional warrior or a branch stacker. Ordinary people like Ricky Muir, who knows what it means to work, who knows what it means to have been unemployed and to pay his rent, can enter the political process, and I think that's a good thing. Diversity is a good thing, and to stop that, I think, would be a very bad thing.
Wouldn't this reform, though, see some of those minor parties have to band together and form actual sort of platforms that people can more easily understand and vote for in a democratic way?
Look, that is one possibility. That is one possibility. But really, these reforms are a little bit like the major parties, and it was the major parties, and I include the Greens in that, the Greens, the Coalition and Labor that was on this Joint Standing Committee. It's really like saying, I'm in the lifeboat, to hell with you, and push you back into the sea. It's just not fair. You know, we are a country that's built on a fair go, and a country that's built on helping the little guy get up in the world. So, you know, if you look back in history, the Greens were first elected on 2 to 3%, Xenophon on less than 3%. Well, now they're there. They're in the lifeboat, and no one else gets there.
Okay, well, let's hear what some of the representatives from a couple of those major parties think. First, you, Alan Tudge. What's your response to that, that the ordinary Australians are being locked out by these main parties, which are banding together in order to preserve their dominance in the political spectrum?
Well, I don't think that's the case, David. I mean, ordinary parties, any party will still be able to run for the Senate. There will be a new rule that requires a party to have at least 1,500 members as part of their party rather than the current rule, which is 500. That's the only thing that would change and be different for, say, Ricky Muir's party. But otherwise they can contest. What the overall objectives of these reforms are is to give the individual greater control over their vote, so that they have the capacity to see exactly where their vote goes for a first preference and for subsequent preferences. Because at the moment, the system says that you can put a 1 above the line, but you may not know exactly where your preference ends up going. And I'll give you one clear example of this where some perverse outcomes may result. And that is, in the last election, there was a no carbon tax party. Now, people who voted 1 above the line for that party would probably think it was going to support that party and policies to support the abolition of the carbon tax. But indeed, in many states, that preference would have gone to Labor before it would have gone to the Coalition. And now I don't think that necessarily would have been the intent of every single person who voted for that single issue of no carbon tax.
Matt Thistlethwaite, would you be happy to see the back of backroom preference deals in the Senate?
Well, David, we support and welcome the recommendations of the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters. I think they'll improve democracy and, importantly, improve Australians' expectations and understanding of the way the Senate voting procedure should work. You mentioned a party or a representative of a party with 0.018% of the vote being elected. I don't think that Australians expect someone with such a small vote being elected compared to someone with, say, 10% of the vote and not being elected. They were some of the outcomes that we've seen in recent Senate elections. The other point to make is that most people, when they go in to vote for the Senate, they go into the polling booth, they have very little understanding of how the process actually works. And if they actually ask the polling officials for the distribution of preferences, they're not available in the polling booth. So I think any process that simplifies the Senate election process, provides a greater understanding of how it works and produces much more democratic outcomes, ought to be supported.
Glenn Drury, a response to that, because really this should be about the Australians who actually cast their votes. It will simplify the system, won't it? It will make it easier for people to understand where their votes are actually going.
What this is really about is benefiting the Greens. And I think that something that your two guests have failed to understand or failed to talk about is if this goes through, as the committee has suggested, then it is very, very likely that the Greens will win one senator in every state at every election, and that will come at the expense of Labor. It's also very likely that if PUP's, Palmer United Party vote keeps going the way it is, that they will win one senator at every election at the expense of the coalition. And given the way the coalition put the Nats on their ticket, that will probably come at the expense of a Nat. So if we were to go through this a couple of electoral cycles from now, the big winner will be the Greens, possibly Palmer. The losers will be the ALP, the coalition, but the big losers will be the minor parties. Well, yes, theoretically, under these reforms, a minor party can still exist, theoretically, but in all probability, in all reality, it's a little bit like a running race where the major parties get out there in all their high-tech running gear and the minor parties have got to wear lead weights. They simply won't be competitive, and ordinary Australians, unless you join a major party and play that whole big major party game, simply won't get a Guernsey.
OK, we'll have to leave our discussion there. We are out of time. Glenn Drury, Matt Thistlethwaite and Alan Tudge, thank you very much for your time. After the break...
Thanks, David.